Tap, tap, there it is again, that sound at your window. Don't be startled, it's only me. Hello, dear friend. I'm so glad you're still awake. Well, barely awake, I hope. That's exactly how I like it. That wonderful, floaty place between the day and the dream, where anything might be true and everything feels a little softer at the edges. My name is Peter Pan, and I've come a very long way tonight. I've flown over sleeping cities and quiet oceans, past mountains that were dreaming of snow and rivers that were murmuring old songs to themselves. I flew fast, because I had a story I couldn't wait to tell you. So pull your blanket up just a little higher, let your eyes grow heavy if they want to. You don't have to hold on to anything tonight. I'll do the holding. Are you ready? Good. Then let me tell you about a girl named Lyra and the night she found a star that hadn't forgotten how to shine. In the world where Lyra lived, stars did not burn out. They fell, when someone made a wish, a real wish, the kind that comes from the deepest, quietest part of your chest. A star would appear in the sky above them, small at first, like the tip of a candle, but if the wish was believed in, truly believed in, it would grow bright and stay. The trouble was, people forgot. They forgot their wishes the way you forget a dream by noon, not all at once, but slowly, like water draining from a bath. A child who had once wished to be a painter would grow up and decide it was silly. A young man who had wished to sail around the world would buy a house instead and tell himself he'd never really meant it. A grandmother who had wished, once, to hear her mother's voice one more time, well, she would stop wishing for that too, eventually, because some wishes hurt too much to keep. And when a wish was forgotten, its star fell. They came down silently, with no warning, little streaks of silver in the dark, cooling as they dropped until they landed in fields and forests and alleyways, no longer blazing, just glowing faintly, like embers that hadn't quite given up. That was where Lyra came in. She was 12 years old, small for her age, with ink-stained fingers and tangled brown hair that she never quite managed to fully brush. She lived on the edge of a village called Ashimir, in a cottage that leaned slightly to the left, as though it were listening to something the rest of the world couldn't hear. And every night, when the rest of Ashimir was asleep, Lyra would pull on her boots, light her lantern, and go out into the dark to collect the fallen stars. She kept them in jars, dozens and dozens of jars, lining every windowsill and shelf in her cottage, each one glowing with the soft, particular light of a forgotten wish. No two were the same color. Some were pale gold, like late afternoon honey, some were a deep, aching blue, some were rose pink and warm, and some were silver white and cool, and some, the ones she was always most careful with, were a trembling violet that seemed almost to pulse, as though the wish inside hadn't quite given up on itself. She didn't know whose wishes they were. That was the thing about forgotten stars, they didn't carry labels, but sometimes, when she held a jar up to the light and looked very carefully, she thought she could almost sense it, a feeling, a shape of longing, a color of hope. She had been doing this for 3 years, ever since the night she found her first fallen star tangled in the roots of the old oak tree at the edge of the meadow. She hadn't known what it was at first, only that it was warm, and sad, and very beautiful, and that leaving it there in the mud felt wrong in a way she couldn't explain. So she'd taken it home, and then she'd gone looking for more. Her mother called it a peculiar hobby. The children at school called her the Star Girl, which was meant as a joke but which Lyra had secretly decided to accept as a compliment. The old bookseller at the edge of the village had once told her, in a low and serious voice, that she was doing something important, that forgotten wishes didn't disappear, just because no one believed in them anymore, that they were still real, still waiting, and that someone ought to look after them. Lyra had thought about that for a long time. On the night our story begins, the sky was unusually busy. 3 stars had fallen before midnight, one into the pond behind the miller's house, one into the chimney of the bakery, which caused a brief and puzzling golden smoke that the baker would talk about for years, and one into the long grass at the edge of the forest, where Lyra found it nestled between 2 stones like a sleeping bird. She was wrapping it carefully in a square of velvet when she saw the 4th, This one was different. The others had fallen the way they always did, swiftly, silently, with a grace that was almost peaceful, like a sigh. This one didn't fall so much as drift. It came down slowly, spinning in a gentle spiral, and it was still lit. Not faintly, not dimly, it was bright, achingly, impossibly bright for a fallen star, throwing soft light across the tops of the grass and the dark edge of the tree line in Lyra's own upturned face. She stood very still. In 3 years of collecting, she had never seen a star fall slowly. She had never seen one still burning on the way down. It landed in the meadow, about 100 paces from where she stood. Lyra ran. The grass was wet with dew and her boots squelched and her lantern swung wildly, throwing arcs of light across the field, but she didn't slow down. When she reached the place where the star had landed, she stopped and dropped to her knees. It was sitting in the center of a small circle of flattened grass, and it was unlike anything she had ever collected before. Most fallen stars looked like smooth stones by the time she found them, small and rounded and glowing from within, like moonstone or sea glass. This one still looked like a star. It had points, 6 of them, delicate as frost on a window pane, radiating outward, and its light was not still, it shifted, slowly, the way light moves at the bottom of a pool of clear water. And it was warm, not just warm the way all the stars were warm, warm the way your own hand is warm, warm the way something recognizes you. Lyra reached out. She was always careful, always gentle, and touched the tip of one of its points with one finger. The light flared, and in that flare, for just 1/2 of 1 second, she saw something. She saw a girl, a small girl, maybe 7 years old, sitting cross-legged on a wooden floor in a shaft of afternoon sunlight, surrounded by papers and colored pencils. The girl was drawing something, a large, spreading tree, covered in lights, in a world that didn't look quite like any world Lyra knew. The girl was humming. She looked entirely, completely happy. Then the vision was gone. Lyra sat back on her heels, breathing hard. She had never seen anything inside a star before. She had felt things, impressions, emotions, faint shapes of longing, but never a picture, never a person. She looked down at the star in the grass. It looked back at her. Stars do not have eyes, of course, and yet, very slowly, very carefully, Lyra reached into her collecting bag and drew out her largest jar, the one she kept for special finds. She opened the lid. She cupped both hands around the star, lifted it from the grass, and lowered it inside. The glow shifted, steadied, and then, very faintly, so faintly she almost thought she'd imagined it, the star made a sound. Not a sound exactly, but more like a feeling in the air, the way a song lingers after the singing has stopped. It felt like, please, not yet. Lyra put the lid on the jar, very gently. She held it up to the moonlight. "I've got you," she said quietly. "Don't worry, I won't let you be forgotten." She walked home through the wet meadow with the jar held carefully against her chest. It wasn't until she'd set it on the windowsill, taken off her boots, and climbed into her chair to look at it properly in the lamplight, that she noticed something that made her stomach drop and her heart do a very strange, complicated thing. The star's light that's shifting, blue gold, remembering light was exactly the same color as the light she had seen once, years ago, in a dream she had long since stopped letting herself think about, a dream about a tree full of lights, and a girl who had wanted, more than anything, to be the one who made it real. Lyra did not sleep that night. She sat in her chair by the window until the sky outside began to shift from black to the deep, uncertain gray that comes just before dawn, that hour when the world holds its breath and everything feels possible and fragile at the same time. The jar sat on the windowsill in front of her, and the star inside it had not dimmed. That was the strangest thing. All her other stars, even the freshest ones, found the same night they fell, would begin to soften within a few hours, their light settling into the gentle, steady glow of something resting. But this one was still shifting, still moving. Its blue gold light reached and pulled like a tide, like something searching, like something trying to find its way out. Lyra had her sketchbook open on her knees. She often drew the stars she collected, trying to capture their colors, their particular quality of light, but she hadn't drawn a single line. She'd been staring at the star for hours, and the longer she looked, the more she felt it. Not just the impression she always felt from the stars, that vague emotional shape, that outline of a longing. This was clearer, more specific. It pressed against the inside of the jar like a word on the tip of a tongue. Tree, lights, make it real. She closed her sketchbook. Whose wish are you? She whispered. The star pulsed once warm, and close, and Lyra's stomach turned over slowly, the way it does when you already know the answer to a question but aren't ready to say it out loud. She was 7 years old when she'd made the wish. She'd been sitting on the floor of her mother's workshop. Her mother was a woodcarver, and the workshop smelled of pine shavings and linseed oil and something sweet that Lyra had never been able to name, surrounded by her drawings, working on the most important project she had ever undertaken. She was going to build a tree, not a real tree, but a constructed one, made of carved wood and wire and hundreds of tiny glass beads she'd been collecting from the junk market for 2 years. A tree covered in light, a tree you could sit under in the dark and feel as though the sky had come down to meet you. She had drawn the plan 17 times, she had started building it twice and taken it apart when it wasn't right. She had known, with the absolute, unshakable certainty that children sometimes carry and adults so rarely trust, that she could do it. That she would do it. She had wished for it on the first star she'd seen that evening, the way her grandmother had taught her. And then, 3 weeks later, her mother's workshop had burned down. No one was hurt. The fire had started from an oil lamp left too close to a pile of wood shavings, late at night, and by morning, there was nothing left but ash and the stone foundation. Her mother had rebuilt. The workshop was different now, larger, with better windows, but Lyra had never gone back in. Not really, not with the part of herself that mattered. She had packed away her drawings. She had stopped going to the junk market. She had told herself, with the practiced certainty of someone who has been hurt and is determined never to be hurt that way again, that it had been a childish idea, that she'd never really meant it, that some things were better left as plans. She had forgotten the wish, or she had tried to. The star glowed in its jar, blue golden patient, and said nothing, because stars do not speak. And yet, you didn't forget, you just put me somewhere you couldn't see me. Lyra sat very still, then she reached out and picked up the jar. The moment her hands closed around the glass, the world changed. It didn't change the way it does in stories where there's a flash of light and suddenly you're somewhere else. It changed quietly. The way a room feels different when someone you love walks into it. The air in the cottage shifted, the shadows deepened at the edges, and between one breath and the next, Lyra became aware with the certainty she felt in her bones rather than her mind that the jar in her hands was a door, not metaphorically, not almost, a door. She could feel the hinge of it, the weight of what was on the other side. She had a choice. She could put the jar back on the windowsill. She could tend it as she tended all the others, keep it safe, keep it glowing, not let it go dark. That was the right thing, that was what she did. Or she could open it. Her thumb found the lid of the jar. She hadn't opened it since she put the star inside. She never opened them, once sealed. That was the rule she'd made for herself years ago, because she hadn't known what would happen if she did and caution had seemed wise. She opened it. The light came out like a breath being released. It didn't flood the room or blaze or burn, it simply expanded, the way warmth expands when you open a door between a cold room and a warm one. The blue gold light spread gently around Lyra, and the star rose from the jar, and hung in the air before her, and the air around it shimmered, and there was the door. It was made of light itself, tall and narrow, filled with a radiance that was neither quite gold nor quite blue, but something that existed only between the two. The color of a wish that hasn't decided yet what it wants to be. Around its edges, other lights moved, fragments, Lyra realized with a jolt, of the stars she had collected. All her jars, all her years of gathering, their light was part of this, somehow woven into the door's frame like threads in a tapestry. She stared at it for a long moment, then she stepped through. The The world on the other side was a maze. That was the only word for it, but it was the most beautiful maze she had ever seen, and also the most unsettling. Its walls were not stone or hedge but compressed starlight, dense and luminous, stretching up farther than she could see into a sky that was neither day nor night but something in between. The paths branched and curved and doubled back, lit from within with the particular colors of forgotten wishes, and as she walked, she began to understand that each path corresponded to a wish, a different one, a different life left unlived. This path, rose golden warm, smelled of bread and hummed with laughter, someone's wish to open a bakery, perhaps, or to fill a house with family. That path, deep ocean blue and cold at the edges, whispered of faraway places and the sound of waves. Another path, silver white and very quiet, felt like a wish to simply be seen, to simply be known, and in the center of the maze she could feel it. A warmth like a compass needle pulling north was hers. She walked for what felt like a long time. The maze did not make it easy. Paths that looked clear would bend away from the center, walls of starlight would shift when she wasn't looking, rearranging themselves with a sound like distant wind chimes. Once, she turned a corner and found herself facing her own reflection in a wall of perfectly still light, and the reflection looked at her with an expression that was not quite her own. It looked tired, not frightened, just tired, in the way of someone who has been carrying something heavy for so long they've forgotten what it would feel like to put it down. She looked at her reflection for a long moment. "I know," she said quietly, "but I'm here now." The reflection's tired expression shifted barely, just at the corners, into something that might, eventually, become a smile. The wall dissolved, the path ahead was clear, and there, at the center of the maze, was the wish. It looked exactly as she remembered it. The tree she had drawn 17 times. The tree she had begun to build and abandoned. It stood before her, full and branching. Its boughs hung with hundreds of tiny lights, each one glowing softly in a different shade of warmth. Under its light, the maze's walls had fallen away entirely, replaced by open dark and the feeling of a sky full of stars. The tree was real. Here, in this place, it was entirely, completely real. Lyra walked toward it slowly. Her throat was tight. She put one hand on its bark, smooth and warm, the way wood is warm when it has been worked by careful hands, and looked up through its lit branches into the dark above. Something inside her, something she had packed away carefully in a box and shoved to the very back of a very high shelf, made a sound like a door being opened after a long winter. But then she heard something else, a sound from the paths behind her, a shifting, a tightening, a sense of the maze beginning to close in again. The walls of starlight that had dissolved were rebuilding, slowly, at the edges of the clearing. The tree's lights flickered, and a voice, not a voice exactly, but a feeling shaped like one, the feeling of the wish, speaking in the only way a wish knows how, said something she hadn't expected. "You can have this back, but you will have to choose it, really choose it, not the way you chose it at 7, when choosing was easy. Choose it knowing it might not work. Choose it knowing you might have to start over. Choose it knowing the workshop might burn down again. Can you do that?" Lyra's hand tightened on the bark of the tree. The maze walls rose another inch. The lights flickered again. Lyra stood very still. The maze walls were rising at the edges of the clearing slowly, but certainly, the way a tide comes in. The tree's lights flickered once, twice. The warm glow that had filled the clearing was thinning at the edges, the cool starlight of the maze pressing inward. She could feel the wish waiting, not impatiently. Wishes are not impatient, they have, after all, been waiting for years already. But it was waiting the way a held breath waits, the way a question waits after it has been asked aloud and the room has gone quiet. Lyra looked up through the lit branches of the tree. She thought about the workshop, the smell of pine shavings and linseed oil, the afternoon light on the wooden floor, the feeling of knowing, really knowing, in the wordless way that children know things, that she was going to make something that mattered. She thought about the fire, the ash, the stone foundation, the way she had folded up her drawings and put them in a box and told herself it was fine. It was childish. She didn't really mean it. She thought about 3 years of walking through wet fields in the dark, collecting the fallen wishes of strangers, keeping them safe in jars. 3 years of tending other people's forgotten things with a care she had never thought to turn toward her own. She understood something, standing there with her palm against the warm bark. She had been keeping the wishes of strangers because it was easier than keeping her own. Because if a stranger's wish went dark, it was sad, but it was not her. But her own wish, this wish, the one she had packed away so carefully, if she took it out and held it up to the light and it went dark anyway, that would mean something she wasn't sure she could survive knowing. That you tried and it wasn't enough. The maze walls rose another inch. The tree lights flickered again, longer this time. Lyra closed her eyes. She thought about the girl in the vision, the 7-year-old on the floor, drawing and humming, entirely happy. She thought about how that girl had not been afraid. Not yet. She had simply loved the idea of the tree and believed she could build it, and that had been enough to begin. Maybe that was all choosing required. Not certainty, not a guarantee, just the willingness to begin again from the place where you stopped. She opened her eyes. Yes, she said, quietly, clearly, to the wish, to the tree, to the version of herself who had given up. Yes, I choose it. The maze walls stopped. For one long, suspended moment, everything in the clearing was perfectly still. Lyra, the tree, the lights, the walls, the between sky above. The whole world held its breath. Then the tree blazed, not violently, not a flash or an explosion, nothing alarming. It blazed the way a fire blazes when someone finally adds a log. It's been needing a deep, sustained surge of warmth and light that filled the clearing from the ground up, pushing the maze walls back inch by inch, foot by foot, until they were far away and then farther and then simply gone. The between sky above shifted, not today, not quite, but to something warmer. The blue-gray uncertainty resolved into the particular deep blue of very early morning, when the first light is still just a rumor at the edge of the world. Stars appeared, real ones, steady and clear. Lyra stood in the light of her own wish and felt, for the first time in 5 years, the specific feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Then the tree did something unexpected. Its lights, all hundreds of them, the tiny warm lights she had drawn in 17 different versions of the plan, began to lift, one by one, and then in clusters, they rose from the branches like luminous seeds releasing from a dandelion. They drifted upward, slowly, each one glowing with its own particular shade of warmth, rising into the early morning blue above the clearing. And as they rose, Lyra realized they were not disappearing. They were joining the sky, not becoming ordinary stars. They remained small, warm, individual, the specific warmth of a made thing rather than a born one. They arranged themselves loosely in the space above her, and she understood, without being told, that they would stay, that they were hers, that they were real, here in this place, and that here in this place was not as separate from the waking world as she had thought. She looked at her hands. In her right palm, small and steady, was a 6-pointed star from the jar. It had found its way back to her in the moment of choosing, and it sat in her hand now like a compass, like a key, like the first line of a drawing. The wish, fully remembered, fully chosen, no longer fallen. The door of light appeared at the edge of the clearing, the way it had appeared in her cottage, quietly, without fanfare, simply there when she was ready for it. Lyra looked back at the tree once more. Its branches were lighter now, the lights lifted away, but it was still there, still real, still hers, still something she had built in this place through the simple, enormous act of saying yes to herself. "I'll come back," she told it. She stepped through the door. She was sitting in her chair by the window. The cottage was exactly as she had left it, the jars on the shelves, the lamp burning low, the first pale light of dawn showing at the edge of the window glass. The jar that had held the star was still in her hand, its lid beside it on the table. Her sketchbook was on her knees, but in her right hand, warm against her palm, the 6-pointed star rested. Not in the jar, not on the windowsill, in her hand, where she was holding it, and her sketchbook, when she looked down at it, was no longer blank. On the open page, in her own hand though she had no memory of drawing it, was a plan. A tree, intricate and detailed, more fully realized than any of the 17 versions she had drawn when she was 7. Better, the structure was elegant in a way her child self hadn't known how to achieve yet. The proportions were right, she could see, looking at it, exactly how to begin. She sat for a long time, looking at the drawing, and the star in her hand, and the early light gathering at the window. Then she picked up her pencil and began to add to it. She didn't know if the workshop would burn down again. She didn't know if the tree would come out the way she imagined, or if she'd have to start over, or how many times. She didn't know if anyone would ever see it or care that it existed. She only knew that the wish was hers again, that she had gone somewhere very deep inside herself and found it still burning, still waiting, still entirely and stubbornly alive, and that this time, she was going to let it. Outside the cottage, the last stars of the night were fading in the early sky, but if you looked carefully, and Lyra had always been good at looking carefully, you might notice that the light didn't entirely go. It shifted, rather, settled into the blue of the morning, made it a little warmer than it had been. Little lights, here and there, in a sky that was learning to hold them. There it is, that feeling in your chest right now, that warm, slightly aching, wide open feeling. That's what happens when a story does what it's supposed to do. It doesn't just end, it leaves a door open somewhere inside you. Lyra found her wish again. She found it not because the path was easy or because nothing had gone wrong or because someone handed it to her, but because she walked back into the place she was most afraid of and said yes to herself. You can do that too, you know, whatever you've packed away, whatever you've told yourself was silly, or too late, or too risky, or too much to hope for, it hasn't gone anywhere. Wishes don't disappear, they just wait. They wait in the quiet parts of you, glowing very softly, hoping you'll come back for them. And you can, whenever you're ready. But that is a thought for tomorrow, I think. Right now, the stars outside your window are doing what stars do, keeping watch, keeping light, keeping the dark at bay just enough for dreams to move through safely. So close your eyes, dear friend. Let the morning come slowly. Let your own wishes, whatever they are, sit warm and patient in the dark, knowing you haven't forgotten them. Not really. I'll be off now. There are other windows I haven't visited yet, and the night is still long enough for one more story somewhere. But I'll be back. I always come back. Sleep well, dream bravely, and when you wake, build the tree.